In this video, I will show you how to do a reductive charcoal drawing. You'll need vine charcoal, compressed charcoal, a charcoal pencil, and eraser. Your kneaded eraser will work well as a chamois if you have one, or if you have like a tissue that doesn't have lotion in it, or a paper towel, something like that would work too. So the first thing you'll do is take that vine charcoal and use the side of it and cover your whole paper with some vine charcoal. So you're not pushing super hard. You're just trying to lay in value over the whole sheet. You can see my vine charcoal just broke, and that's fine. I'm just using half of it now. Now that I've gotten through that outer shell of the charcoal, it's a little easier for me to deposit material. It's turning into a fairly tiny piece, and that's fine. I'm just using as much of it as I can. You might go through a whole stick just on this process. But again, I'm not trying to push too hard. And this charcoal wasn't super fresh, so I think what happens is the charcoal gets kind of a skin on it, and then it's sometimes hard to use. So if your charcoal is like that, you can always like shave off a little bit of the outside of it with an X-Acto knife or something, and that might help you access the softer core. Now I'm using the chamois to just really lightly smear this gray value everywhere. So I'm not trying to put pressure. If I really scrub this into the paper, then it'll be hard to erase. And you want to be able to erase this easily. So the idea of reductive means you're taking away material rather than adding material. And so you're going to start by using your eraser to sketch out your drawing. So I'm working with this Memento Mori still life that I set up in my How to Make a Still Life video, and I have it pictured down in the bottom right, more or less how I'm going to draw it. Of course, I will exclude some of that background information that I can see, but the gray fabric gives me an overall sense of the background and ground plane that I'll work with. You can see that I'm using my kneaded eraser to sketch out the composition of my drawing. I'm working from direct observation, and I'm using my eraser like I would if I were using a pencil just to sketch my initial scale and where the forms will fall. One of the nice things about this approach to drawing with charcoal is that it removes the anxiety of making marks on the page, because you've already made your paper gray all over. It doesn't feel as scary to work with the eraser to remove information, and you can kind of push and pull with the charcoal as much as you need within the limitations of the paper. I just did this drawing on newsprint, which isn't an ideal paper for working with charcoal. It doesn't have very much tooth to it, so it can only hold so much charcoal. And it's not very tough, so it doesn't hold up to a lot of push and pull with adding and subtracting with the eraser. So once you've gotten all of the primary components of your drawing laid in with the eraser, and you've pulled some of the highlights out of the drawing, you can switch to working both additively and reductively to create your drawing. When I draw with charcoal, I prefer to start with the vine charcoal, even when I'm just working additively. The vine charcoal is pretty easy to erase, and it can give you a range of value from very, very light, close to white, to perhaps a mid-tone, you'll find that it moves around really easily on the paper, so it can be smudged and create soft textures easily. So it's really nice for making shadows or subtle value ranges. And then I prefer to go over the top of it with the compressed charcoal pencils, and if I'm trying to cover a lot of ground or to work more bluntly or gesturally, then I might use the compressed charcoal sticks. It just kind of depends on the drawing. Right now I'm using the vine charcoal to bring out some of the shadows and midtones in this macaw skull. And with charcoal, there's a lot of play involved with making marks and then altering the marks. So what you lay down initially isn't necessarily what you'll end with. So I'm putting some fairly blunt marks in here, but ultimately they will become smudged and will be much softer shadows. I also don't have to worry too much about outlining objects with the vine charcoal because, again, the charcoal, it will move around a lot, and so it can be blended into the background really easily, and the vine charcoal can be used to help define edges of forms. And later on, those lines that I've laid in won't be so obvious. You can also see I'm still using those same sighting skills that we practiced with perspective to capture relative scale and position of the objects in my still life. So don't forget about those skills that we've been developing. You can chart the relationship between objects in direction and double check the height of where an object falls against another object and that kind of thing. I'm now working on the orchid shadow. And again, because the vine charcoal can be fairly easily removed and smudged, this is a good type of charcoal to use for shadows. You can always intensify the drawing later, so I tend to build contrast over time rather than starting out with my compressed charcoal, which is hard to erase. You can see I got carried away with the scale of the orchid's shadow and brought it up too high, and I realized it has to fit more within the height of the candlestick there. And so I smudged out that vine charcoal that I had just laid in, and I'm trying to shrink that shadow down so that I have space for the orchids. So now I've sped the video up even more. This is all just me laying in basic values with the vine charcoal still. I'm covering the whole drawing with the same tool. So rather than, for example, starting on the macaw skull and then finishing it, I want to treat the whole drawing to the same level as I go. So I'm getting in all of the major components and making sure that my scaling is fairly accurate and getting in some of those initial values and shadows, checking my measurements. And you can see I'm still working with the eraser here to hone edges, bring out some highlights, get the drawing to a pretty solid place just using that vine charcoal and your eraser with nothing else. And I'm working with my fingers and using the charcoal either on its tip if I need a sharp line, or on its side if I want to be efficient and to cover a large area. Okay, so now I have a baseline drawing in with the vine charcoal, so I'm going to start working with my compressed charcoal pencil. And this is, well, you have different softnesses or hardnesses of your pencil. The softer it is, the more charcoal it will lay down. The harder it is, the easier it'll be to get a very fine point. So these charcoal pencils will be good for your detail work. So I'm starting in here on the candle and getting some of those sharper little edges where the drips of the candle wax are happening, and some of the reflection and darks and lights in the candlestick. It's happening off camera, but you can see me messing with my kneaded eraser. What you want to do with it to freshen it up is to stretch it and fold it over itself and to find a clean area. You'll find that it can kind of eat the charcoal and clean itself to an extent. So you should be able to use the same kneaded eraser the whole semester, but eventually it might become stiff and too dirty, and then you would want to get another one. You can see I'm getting darker values from this charcoal pencil, and I'm also able to work in much more detail. So I'm able to do some of those sharper shadows and line work with this tool. Sometimes I do lean my hand against the paper when I'm drawing, but often what I do is I put my non-dominant hand underneath my forearm and I create a fist, and that way I create this prop that my arm can rest against while my hand hovers above the paper, and that can avoid smearing my drawing. If I do set my hand down, I try not to move it across the paper because it'll smear it. You can use a piece of paper as a buffer between your hand and what's below it, but even that piece of paper will get dirty and it will potentially spread some charcoal around your drawing. And you will get used to this. You'll have to constantly pull out highlights or add more darker values because your drawing will shift and it's malleable as you're working on it. So often at the very end of a charcoal drawing, I will enhance those whiter highlights and the darker values. And then you can spray it with spray fixative, which was a recommended supply on your materials list. You may not have any. If you do have any, it's for preserving a drawing like this that will otherwise move around on you in transit. If you do choose to use spray fixative, make sure to use it outside. One thing I wanted to make note of is that my vine charcoal did scratch my paper a little bit, and that's because I used newsprint and because my vine charcoal had a hard shell on it, probably just from sitting around for a while. And so hopefully yours won't do that. That's not supposed to happen, preferably. So I'm going to continue this drawing to a point, but I'm not going to finish it. The main thing to keep in mind with reductive charcoal drawing is that you're starting with this layer of vine charcoal and then working backwards and then starting to add value and remove value in an alternating pattern, essentially. I don't at any point use my compressed charcoal sticks in this drawing, but just use the vine charcoal and my charcoal pencil. If you had a lot of dark area and you wanted to cover a lot of ground, you might use your compressed charcoal stick. And I haven't resolved the ground plane or the background at all, but I feel pretty solid about the basis for the macaw, the candle, and the flower part of the orchid. For more insight in drawing with charcoal, you'll be watching the drawing glass and drawing a basket in charcoal videos.